Joining me today is Bruce MacLellan. He's the founder and chair of Proof Strategies. Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I always enjoy talking about trust.
Let's start with Proof Strategies. What is it that Proof does?
So Proof Strategies is a Canadian-owned and founded communications consulting company. So we help our clients to connect with audiences, and we use all forms of modern communications to do that, whether it be digital communications, employee relations, media communications, all the types of ways that you would reach an audience. We assist our clients to do that.
Now, the reason I have you on this month is because Proof shares an annual Cantrust Index. And this year, it marks a full decade. So you've been doing this now for 10 years of measuring trust in Canada. That's an interesting thing to measure. Can you tell us a little bit about the index and why you started it?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we launched the Cantrust Index 10 years ago because we saw a need for a better understanding of how trust is working in Canada. You know, everyone talks about trust. Nobody would ever say they don't care about trust. Most people would say they aspire to be trusted and trustworthy. However, beyond those words, not a lot of people take the time to really understand how trust works and how they might have a game plan for building trust in their organization or in their own personal life. Trust is very contextual. It varies from country to country. Every country has its own different history, its own values, its own institutions. And therefore, you can't really import a trust study from one country and apply it to another country. And we saw a gap that there was no real trust research being done in Canada about Canadians. So we launched our study 10 years ago.
Now, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds and the methodology of a study, but how do you measure trust?
So the way we approach it is we do a survey of 1,500 Canadians each year, and we use a 7-point scale to ask them to assess how they trust different institutions, different sources of information, leaders, the gamut of sources and places where they might get information in Canada. And over the 10 years, we've been able to track how trust levels have either gone up or gone down or changed. We also probe Canadians on what are their drivers of trust. So we can look at ways that, say, businesses or governments or politicians or other leaders can try to build better trust. There's a huge body of academic research into trust. What we've been doing is putting together public opinion with that academic research to provide toolkits and suggestions for how people can consider having a trust plan. What I think is a great way to describe it is, Alan, trust is, it's like a battery. Are you charging it up or are you wearing it down? And we'd like to see more organizations with a conscious plan for how they can be charging up their trust battery.
That's a metaphor that's very familiar to me because I believe my director uses that exact metaphor when it comes to trust in our organization. Now, you've been doing this for 10 years. That's a good sample size. What have you learned in the last decade?
We've learned a number of things. And of course, who imagined when we started what a decade it would be?
Right.
We had Trump 1.0. Now we're living with Trump 2.0. We had a pandemic that lasted several years. We've had, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada with a whole new look at how our society interacts with our Indigenous communities. There's just been so many things that have happened in these 10 years that have put strains on trust. The rise of social media and how information is received by people. There's just been, incredibly transformative changes to how information is shared or understood, and events that have affected trust. So I'd like to think we were quite timely in deciding to start tracking trust. What we found is a very sad decline of trust in politicians.
Okay.
Politicians in general now are only at 17% trust in Canada. It's shocking. It's appalling. And really, no other profession would ever accept that. So my challenge to politicians is that they shouldn't accept it either. And we need a whole fresh look at how politicians conduct themselves in Canada and aim to build trust in themselves and in their group as a whole. On the other hand, this was very timely with the pandemic, trust in the medical profession, trust in scientists is very high in Canada. Canadians look to people who operate in a fact-based environment based on scientific study as sources of trust. So our most trusted sources in Canada are the medical profession and scientists.
Well, that's reassuring, especially given what's going on in the States right now. We'll get to how maybe we can build that trust in a bit. But first of all, like, our listeners are entrepreneurs and small business owners. Maybe talk about what the key elements for trust are and why this is something that, a business should be mindful of.
Yeah, great question. And, I'm here today as a person who studies trust and does an annual study of trust. But I'm also here as an entrepreneur and a person who started actually several businesses, including Proof Strategies, but others as well. So, every business is stronger and more successful with trust. And, that starts with your employees. We always say to people that trust is built from the inside out. So for me, in launching my company, I wanted to make sure that my team members, my colleagues, my employees trusted what we were doing, believed in what we were doing, understood the values that we stood for as a consulting company, and all wanted to work together to be successful. Second, understand and communicate your values. We know that values are the underpinning of trust. People want to understand who you are and what you stand for. What are your values? And then they can see how those values guide your decisions and how you operate, how you bring products to market, or how you can work with them as customers. And then thirdly, walk the talk.
Right.
You have to do what you say you're going to do it on time or do it early. But it's so important to live up to your own words. Again, with your employees, but also with your external audiences, your customers, your partners, anybody that you're working with to deliver your business. Those are the 3 points I would make for entrepreneurs about building trust.
Now, you're currently a guest on what many would consider a corporate podcast with the goal of helping and informing Canadian small businesses. The Cantrust study talks about the declining trust in media and increased trust for corporations. I mean, what do you think that means for media and corporations?
I think we're living in a very dynamic time for trust. It's very fluid. There's a lot of pressure on trust. I always say it's not easy being trust these days. You're getting shot at from every direction.
Right.
What we've seen over the years is a decline in trust in the media. A significant decline from high 40s down into the 30s, and that's for several reasons, including that the business model is broken. The media organizations are having trouble. They've lost advertising. They can't operate at the scale that they used to operate, so there have been layoffs. Trust is shaken when there's fewer reporters chasing more news, and people just see that the media can't keep up with it all. There's also now a segment of our political class who make a habit of attacking the media. It's become fashionable in some sections of politics to talk about fake news. If you don't like the coverage you're getting, call it fake news and blame somebody else for it. This eventually erodes trust in the media. Now, on the other hand, we as business people should all be interested in what's the trust in the business sector. So it's a mixed story. However, knowing that a lot of the listeners in this podcast are probably in the small and medium-sized category, we know that small and medium-sized businesses are the most trusted in Canada, around the low 40% of trust in Canada, which means, there's room for improvement. But compared to that, large corporations in 2025 are trusted only by about a third of Canadians, so fewer. Now, what's interesting, and you alluded to this, Alan, is that trust in large corporations has slowly been climbing in Canada over 10 years. But it's a slow climb, and it's gone from, around 20% trust up to now about a third of Canadians saying they trust large corporations. It's still not great, but it suggests that large corporations are making an effort and doing better. I think that small business owners should know that they are starting in a strong position. And really what, you want to do is, if you're operating in a category, you want to be a trust leader. Yeah. You want to be ahead of the average. So if we know that the average for trust in a small business is around 40 to 45% in Canada, your goal is to be up above that, up in the 50s or 60s. And then you're an industry leader and you're more than likely going to be outselling your products and services from your competition.
So let's talk about those key drivers. I mean, you mentioned before, building trust as a small business or as an entrepreneur. You state your values up front with your employees, but also externally to your customers. I mean, I know working at Moneris, we have our values. It's imprinted in our brains. We know what they are, and we try to live them every day. Would you say it's the same thing for corporations? And, how does that manifest in our day-to-day?
Well, you're right about, Moneris is very successful at communicating its values and sharing them internally and making sure everybody sees them and that they're being followed. So that's a perfect example of values-based trust building, which we always recommend. The business academics who've studied trust have generally agreed on it. There's a trust trifecta. It's ability, benevolence, and integrity. So if you break down each of those three things, ability. So you build trust partly by just doing a good job of whatever it is you say you do. A person will trust their telecommunications company if their mobile phone works. If their data plan covers this amount of work that they want to do on their mobile phone, if the phone has good coverage when they travel around the community or the country or wherever they go. So just doing a good job of delivering on your service or your product is the ability part of building trust. The second is called benevolence. I like to call it empathy. Really, it means you're a caring company. You're a caring leader. That the way you approach serving your customers or working with your employees is by care, by taking an interest in them, by being empathetic, by understanding their needs and what are their personal circumstances, and connecting with them and understanding it. So being supportive. And then the third is integrity. And, this is honesty. This is, for the example of a business, if you say you're going to do something, you do it and you don't surprise the customer later. If you say the product costs something, that's what you charge them. You don't surprise them with an invoice. If you say a product is guaranteed, you honor those guarantees if you have to. So all of the aspects that make up integrity in how you interact with your customers is the third part of building trust. There's an old saying that trust comes in by foot and it leaves in a Maserati. So what we mean by that is that, it takes time to build up trust. People need to experience you and get to know you and build their own level of trust. So it can take time. But if something goes wrong, the trust can plummet fast. You can lose trust very quickly. I could have a mobile phone that I use for years and I'm happy with it, and then all of a sudden I'm traveling and I don't get any coverage. So my trust is shattered. So trust comes in slowly, it builds slowly, and then if you have a mistake, it's really quick to leave. So there's a whole dimension of trust where you want to be charging up that battery so you have some reserve, you have some resiliency. And then if something goes wrong where your customer loses trust, then you've got to have a big plan to make sure that you're rebuilding it as quickly as possible. And that could include, basic things like apologies, refunds, some other way of showing them that you really care and you're concerned. But having a trust repair plan is a great idea for businesses for those, unfortunate times when something goes wrong.
So we've touched on a little bit what's going on politically. Down south has eroded trust a bit, the proliferation of quote unquote fake news or misinformation, disinformation. The pandemic had a big impact on trust. And now the big topic seems to be AI. How is AI impacting trust in Canada?
Well, it's a great question, Alan, and artificial intelligence is having a complicated impact on trust because firstly, there's trust in AI itself. Mm-hmm. But then secondly, there's trust in how AI is going to change our society. We've been tracking trust in AI now for 7 years, and trust in AI is stalled. So we ask, for example, a question about how do Canadians feel that artificial intelligence will improve their experience as consumers? And in 2018, 37% said it would improve their experience. By 2025, that had dropped to 34%. So in a 7-year period where use of AI was expanding exponentially, trust in AI was declining. And then we ask a different question, which is, do you trust AI will contribute positively to the Canadian economy? 7 years ago, 39% of Canadians said it would trust. They thought they trusted it to improve the economy. By 2025, only 33% say they trust it will improve the Canadian economy. So there's actually a decline in trust as there's an increase in artificial intelligence use. Now, there's also a bit of a conundrum here because people are using AI more than they even realize they are. Right. You know, if you use a smartphone, if you use Google to search for restaurants, AI is becoming so pervasive. We're all probably using it more than we realize. And that's important because we know that there's a correlation. When people say they use AI, they are using AI regularly, their trust level has increased. Mm-hmm. So the users of AI have higher trust in AI. There's also a generation gap here. Younger people, more comfortable and early adopters of technology, are using AI the most, and they also have the highest trust levels. Older Canadians are still skeptical, perhaps because they aren't using it, so they haven't had the benefits of it. Our advice is that if an organization is building artificial intelligence into their operation, they need to be clear and vocal with their customers about how they're using it and why they've chosen to, why it's beneficial. Mm-hmm. I saw a great example recently of a charity, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, which, you know, their job is conservation and environmental protection. They're using artificial intelligence and they're sharing with their donors the ways that it is improving their ability to track and monitor species and species at risk in the habitat they're protecting. So it's a very tangible benefit coming from artificial intelligence. And that's an example of how we think all organizations need to be more proactive about sharing the benefits of artificial intelligence, because right now it's going to create a gap where it's being used more and more, but it's undermining confidence.
It's called the Cantrust Index, and you guys have been doing this now for 10 years. It's very comprehensive. I looked through it the other day. You have measures based on generation, you have measures based on gender, and you've shared a few of the examples here. Now, if folks want to see a copy of this report or learn more about proof strategies, where would they go?
Our annual trust study is shared openly and available for free, and you can download a copy of it at cantrustindex.ca, which is a website that we operate as part of our overall company website. And we're more than happy for people to take a look at trust and learn more about how they can build it in their organization. And can I say one more thing?
Yes.
I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, and also speaking as an entrepreneur. I think that the circumstances that we're in Canada, it cries out for people to be entrepreneurial, for Canadians to step up and to be a little more comfortable with risk and start businesses. When we have Canadian-owned businesses, our country is so much stronger. Our Canadian-owned businesses employ people, they invest in Canada, they give back to Canada through charitable programs and other ways they help their community. Canada, more than ever, needs strong Canadian entrepreneurs, and I encourage anyone listening to this podcast to take the risk, take the plunge, and you will never look back.
That's the best way to end this interview. Thank you so much for your time today, Bruce.
Thank you for that opportunity.